The first area that we want to confront or we want to address has to do with doctrinal pillars. And these pillars are really important because ultimately we are concerned with how do we internalize the things that we believe. Scripture is very clear that when we talk about a biblical point of view, we are talking about internalizing what we believe. We are talking about those glasses, those lenses through which we look. And this doctrine then is going to afford us certain kinds of accountability. We're going to be concerned about the application of what we believe in our classes, in our structures. So my affections are going to be internalized by how I think biblically about my classes. Just one snapshot of this, one baseline idea of doctrine would include the fact that God is the final authority of all truth. Not only does all truth originate with God, not only is all truth His, not only does He unify all truth, but He is going to be the final assessor of truth. This slide, for instance, gives us the wherewithal to understand that from a biblical point of view. Numbers tells us that God doesn't change His mind. It also tells us that His word and works are perfect, that His word is eternal, and that that eternal word is going to be the basis for how we think about truth. Now, I mentioned doctrinal pillars, and I believe that there are two pillars, two basic understandings of all of life that run through any given discipline. In the university, in K-12, it really doesn't matter. In fact, I would say that these two ideas run through every single discussion that anybody will ever have about life in general. Those two pillars, those two ideas are authority and humanity. These ideas include the questions for authority, who says? Every teenager asks the question, who are you to tell me? And then humanity asks the question, who are we? Those two questions, who says and who are we, acknowledges very important doctrinal ideas. The first, when we consider authority, is that authority must come from outside of us. We're concerned, of course, when we think about authority, that this authority rests on God's eternal word, and coming out of heaven, this is the basis for our authority, the Scriptures, a biblical worldview integration. Then the question of humanity. When we think about our humanness, we are concerned with who are we, and then we understand from this that we bear responsibility for ourselves. So if indeed doctrine is internalized in our person, then when we consider how that actually works out, we are concerned with the responsibility that comes from within ourselves. So when we think about this and we think about authority structures, and I'm concerned about those as much as anybody might be, just as a sidebar idea here, we want to consider the thought that respect isn't earned, it is simply given. So Scripture is very clear. You can read these passages on the slide. Romans chapter 13, 1 Corinthians chapter 5, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 suggests in both sessions that these ideas of respect are given. We give respect to authority that is outside of us. So you think about your dean or your chair of your department. All of those kinds of authorities are true. And we, by the way, are the authorities in the classroom, just so our students understand those kinds of concepts. But back to these pillars, once we understand who says and whose we are and who we are, then we understand how we should think differently. And also here, we need to consider what our students will confront when they leave this place. We are concerned here for the modern university, because the modern university does not believe what a Christian university does. In the modern university, authority is substituted. That is, humans now create the authority structures for us. Then, of course, when we think about our humanity, we're concerned that our responsibility does not come from within ourselves, but outside of ourselves. And ultimately, we become not only our own authority, we become a law unto ourselves. Those are two ideas that are going to have to be examined from a Christian point of view in your classes. When I consider this, I think about the 20th century dictators. I think about Mao Zedong. I think about Fidel Castro. I think about Joseph Stalin. Human authority will always grab power. They will turn authority into a power grab. This is certainly true with Adolf Hitler and Idi Amin, Pol Pot. It wouldn't really matter. Anybody who becomes an authoritarian will turn eternal ethics into a human-centered viewpoint of power. Just to put a point to it, it's important for us to say that if we're concerned about justice, if we're concerned about authority in justice, then we must say this, that justice is impossible if it's left up to just us. We cannot be the ultimate authority. Ultimately, it must come from an eternal source, the personal, eternal, triune creator of the universe. So we come back to these slides, we come back to these two pillars. Authority and humanity are going to undergird everything that we say and everything we do in the classroom, and of course, even as we prepare our instruction for those classrooms. So when we think about humanity, what are we going to be concerned about? We need to remember that humanity is unique, special, distinctive. We are different than robots. We are different than animals. Why is this? Because we've been created in God's image. Genesis 1 and throughout the rest of Scripture makes this very clear, that the imago Dei, the image of God, is the crucial distinction between humanity and all other creation. And that is important for us to remember, that when we consider our students, how we treat them, but also how we treat our subjects and how we treat humans within the subjects that we are studying. So whenever I was asked to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the public university where I taught, I would say to my colleagues, I just ask people to come into my classes to speak to my students who don't look like me. I'm concerned that people hear from different sources of information. I'm concerned that folks see people that do not look like the standard professor that you see in front of you right now. And by the way, if we're going to talk about the image of God, the only basis for DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is IOG, the image of God. We are based from a human point of view, from a Christian vantage point, as humans made in God's image, and everything that we discuss concerning anything else arises out of that idea. Now, there are some in our culture who want to suggest that choice should be a doctrine that they hold to, and some do. Choice, however, does have a consequence. So, for instance, on this slide, if you're thinking about the Atlantic magazine again, as I've suggested one article already, here is another one, that when we consider Down syndrome children, or children who have Down syndrome, we have to ask the question, as the Atlantic Monthly did, are we going to eliminate children in the womb that we know genetically already have this particular syndrome? That's the question. And once you have made that choice, it's going to be a consequence. From a decidedly Hebraic Christian point of view, of course, we would say that we are pro-life and we are concerned about all humans in and out of the womb. We are then concerned about this absolute truth versus our inherent human corruption. And here is where I'd like to say we need to do a lot more study and a lot more application from the Pentateuch, that is the first 5 books of the Bible, and specifically the law codes that come out of Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. These law codes establish for us the very basis for our discipline of study. Here's just one example. In Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 5 through 8, that passage tells us, God, through Moses, is saying to his people, hey, these laws that I'm giving you today are going to make you look so good in front of all of the other nations around you. They're going to say, you must have a great God because you have such good laws. Just as a comment about this, in the ancient Near Eastern world, whenever law codes were compared and one was found better than another, this was an indication that your God was better than the people's gods that they were worshiping on the side. So when we think about the nations around Israel, they were saying, your God's better than our gods because this law, your law, is better than ours. Those are a couple of doctrinal pillars, 2 ideas that are going to run through every discipline that we teach.